There it is. I gave the announcement.
So once again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our third webinar with Transcend. We're so excited that you joined us today. And thank you if you've attended the first and second webinar. And even if this is your first webinar, you can still access the first and second webinar along with any of the tools that were shared during those on our capacity building website. So you're able to catch up to webinar 3 by visiting our capacity building webpage to get the additional information that you possibly missed in the first and second webinar. But thank you again for being here today. We're excited about what Sean and Dale from Transcend is about to share with us in this webinar today. Also, during the session today, we're going to ask that if you have any questions, that you type them in the chat box, and we will get to those questions at the end of the session today. And as a reminder, after each webinar, we do have a coaching call scheduled. So the third coaching call in alignment with this webinar is scheduled for May 18th at 2 p.m. May 18th at 2 p.m. And we'll send you the link for that coaching call shortly after this presentation. So once again, thank you so much. And we're just going to turn it over to Sean and Dale.
Perfect. Thank you, Vanessa. And welcome back, everybody, to webinar number 3 in the Texas A&M, the Capacity Building Project webinar series, Facilitating Meaningful Work Experiences for Students with Disabilities. My name is Sean Roy. I am with an organization called Transcend that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. I'm joined by my colleague, Dale Verstegen, who is waving at you and will introduce himself maybe a little bit later on. This is the third of a 3-part webinar series that we are providing for the Capacity Building Project. And so hopefully a lot of you or most of you have joined us for the first 2. I thank you, Vanessa, for mentioning that people can get caught up if they want to. I'm a reader of mystery books, and I don't like to read books out of order. I'm one of those guys. And so, you know, if you don't like to watch things out of order, you can always get caught up as well. Today, we're going to talk about employer engagement, understanding labor needs, and proposing a good job match. The first in the series, we talked about practical discovery and assessment strategies. In the second webinar, we talked about engaging families and getting a little bit into the job development, you know, using Venn diagrams, for example, to pinpoint job opportunities for students. And today, what we really want to do is hone in on that one thing, as Dale likely is going to say, that makes people feel uncomfortable. But it's also probably the single most important thing that interagency school teams or anybody who facilitates work experience can become comfortable with, which is really approaching employers in a productive way. And today we're going to teach you a little bit about how to do that. Linking in, of course, the first 2. So we really view this as kind of a continuum. We had a coaching call on webinar 2. And unfortunately, it fell on the exact same day as the Texas Transition Conference. And so many of you were not able to join us. And so the coaching call that we have coming up on the 18th, feel free, you know, we can just go over absolutely everything at that time, but also feel free to put some stuff in the chat box. I love the running commentary that we've established, but also the questions have been absolutely great. You've been a wonderful group to work with. So we kind of sad that this is the last one. If you want to know more about us, we are a national training and technical assistance nonprofit located in Rockville, Maryland. As we've said many times, Dale and I are not in Rockville, Maryland. I'm in outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Dale is outside of Madison, Wisconsin. We have a lot of training resources, including an online library of trainings that you can access on a fee-based on a fee-based platform. So you can go to our website, or you could contact us either at inquiries@transcend.org, or our emails and names are at the very end of the presentation. We love to hear from people. So that's us and a little bit about what we do. So today we are going to recap what we did in webinar 2. Where did we leave off? Dale's going to talk a bit about knowing where you are in the job development process and why that's important. And then trying to give you some strategies and some tools to approach employers confidently. We've sent a lot of tools this time around that I see Eric has linked in the chat box. And that's great, because we again, Dale and I like to train to tools. We like to give you things that you can use in the field with the hope that you will take these strategies and really use them yourselves. Talking about the information interview with employers, which is key to this particular session, and how you do that to identify labor needs. And being able to determine the roles of not only families, but your interagency partners, and then ultimately leading to the development of an employer proposal. The way that we look at it, it's a letter, but it's basically something formal that you outline the labor needs. And we really want people to understand, because the goal here is to seal the deal. We want to take you all the way from discovering the student's talents all the way to sealing the work experience. That's the 3-part webinar that we're going through with you. So where did we leave off at the last one? We talked a lot about reimagining family partnerships and viewing families as a true partner in the process of securing work experiences. You leveraging not only their energy, but their community contacts and their ability to reinforce and to help build skills. We showed you the family interview as a way to enhance the information that you gather for the positive personal profile. And we shared with you how to set the interview up, and we gave you the family interview form. We went through using Venn diagrams. So after you get a decent amount of information on your positive personal profile about a student, you set up a 3-circled Venn diagram. You put traits or talents in those circles, and you try to find where those circles match. We introduced you to Jeff. If you remember, Jeff really liked sports, and he had cleaning experience, and he liked working with the public. And we showed you a Venn diagram that brought those things together and told you ultimately he ended up working at a health club where he is still today. We gave you some strategies about working through family apprehension, because you no doubt are going to run into some families, especially those of students with higher support needs, that have significant questions about whether or not their son or daughter can work, should work, are going to be safe at work. And so we gave you some strategies there. And then we really wanted to begin that process of taking what you learned from the family, taking what you learned from the positive personal profile, and putting it into a job development plan that makes things actionable and starts to assign roles and responsibilities to people. So now what? Now what is, how do you take that information and how do you approach an employer effectively with that? And to begin this, I'm going to hand it back over to Dale.
Okay, thank you, Sean. So the job development plan, if you might remember, we mentioned that at the end of our last webinar. Its purpose is to really kind of summarize what you've all obtained in terms of information about the individual, vocational goals, types of jobs that he might do well at, as well as specific skills, personality traits that would be promising features of the individual when it comes to potential types of jobs. So we have some good information about the individual that kind of helps us identify what's next. What sort of places should we investigate? Where might this person really make a good contribution to certain types of businesses? And then you want to use that job development plan to help determine who's going to do the follow-up. And And so some of you on the webinar might be folks that are in fact responsible to make some of that outreach to the employers. And we're hoping that you'll find this webinar to be beneficial to you. What if you are a person who that isn't part of your job? Well, we still think you have a lot to contribute to this whole process, particularly as it relates to working with the individual, helping to identify their discovery and assessment information. But we want you also to know about what is necessary to do a good job with employers, so that even if you're not responsible for those tasks, that you can know how to partner with the people who will be, and that you can play a role. So another good reason to sit in on this. And then we've been kind of sharing, it's not really a customized employment training by any means, but we've been sharing some of the customized employment concepts, because when you get out to talk to that employer, that might be what is the best opportunity for a work experience or for a paid job for specific individuals. So that's just a little on the job development plan, and that's how it's used, is to make that bridge. And here's what it looks like. And you want to make that bridge from discovery and assessment to, okay, now what? What employer should we be contacting? And what is it that we should be looking for? And this kind of gives you that summary information that's on the job development plan. And this is just another one of our tools. Like Sean mentioned, we like to train to the tools, train to a process. And you have access to this tool, and feel free to make it your own. Put your logos on it, maybe change some of the headings, depending on how you want to use the information. So when we used to job develop, these are some of the things that I've seen done, and in some cases early in my career, I used to do it myself. And that was look for those easier jobs to fill. Look for those where you have the highest turnover, where the employers are finding it the most difficult to keep people in those positions. And we all know what positions those are. It's fast food. It can be other kinds of restaurants. It can be janitorial, cleaning, grocery stores, where a lot of the kids tend to work when they're in high school. But what happens is also when we do approach those businesses, inadvertently, we sometimes sell disability. So if you go to an employer and you want to inquire about jobs and you want to identify your program as serving youth or adults with disabilities, you could, in fact, by saying things like give them a chance, or we have this untapped labor pool, you basically are saying hire them and they have a disability. And so you're basically asking to have them hire a person with a disability, where we feel employers don't hire people with disabilities. They hire people that can have the ability to do the tasks that need to be done. It doesn't mean they might not have a disability, but that isn't what they're hiring for. That's not their criteria. So we don't want to inadvertently make this about the person's disability. If anything, we've got to work harder to help them feel comfortable that this person can work and do the jobs required, regardless of whether they have a disability. Sometimes we oversell things like OJT, that stands for on-the-job training, or sometimes our work experiences have a stipend associated with them. And we kind of oversell this notion of free labor, that you can get this person and you don't have to pay for their labor, where we don't think that's also the best approach. We think the best approach is based on the merits of the individual. And so that really needs to be our primary focus. And also feel very strongly that if we encourage people with disabilities to go through the normal process of applying for a job, interviewing for a job, and negotiating a job, then what are we here for? And so what we feel pretty strongly about is the fact that we should be in front of that application. Any place that they want to apply for a job, we should first be checking it out, making sure that the environment and the tasks required would make for a good job match for this individual, rather than setting them up to fail. And if we do think it's a good job match, it's in our best interest to get out in front of that person and tell them that. Tell the employer, think you have a good job candidate here. And here are the services that come with this person that you would get from us. And so by doing those two things, kind of making the case on behalf of the person you're thinking about, and then letting them know about those additional services, then they should be going through the normal job application process, because we've done a nice job of kind of clearing the way for this person based on our recommendation that they might make for a good job match. So as it says in that last one, we want to focus on the employment services that we have to offer. And if you're a school district, believe me, you have employment services that you have to offer employers, and they can and will find them to be beneficial. So this isn't charity. This isn't, help us because we're providing a social service. It's because we can help we can help the business as well as we can help the individuals that we're placing. So that's why we don't think some of those old strategies are effective. And this is the process that we go through to get to placement. Starts with the employer contact, then goes on to the informational interview. After you interview, you then make a presentation, and then you negotiate based on the ask that you've made during that presentation to try to achieve that placement. Now, it might make intuitive sense that this is the process, but what we find is way too often presentation type of information gets made during the initial employer contact. And if not there, sometimes we give out a lot of information during the informational interview, when in fact we're supposed to be gaining information, gathering that information, and setting up the possibility of an effective presentation. And as you heard Sean mention in the beginning of the webinar, we think an employer proposal is the best way for you to make a presentation after you've conducted that informational interview, not during. And so what we think is the goal of the initial contact is only to secure an informational interview and not to share more information than is necessary. We're there to access these employers and learn about their labor needs. And then this kind of moves you into the potential of an effective presentation and negotiation in order to achieve a placement. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sean to talk about interagency roles and responsibilities.
Do you want to hear what I have to say, or should I just move my lips? That was a lesson in lip reading, and anyway, apologize for that. You heard Dale mention that some of you may view directly job development as part of your duties, and some of you may be more loosely related to it. But we believe strongly that has to get figured out. In fact, when we do on-site work, we do pilots around the country where we go in and we help interagency school teams and model some of these tools and processes. One of the first things that Dale and I ask is, who here on this team is responsible for job development and contacting employers? And it's amazing how often we don't get a real definitive answer on that. And so the first thing for an interagency school team, I believe, to figure out is, do you have somebody on staff that can do it? Do you have the capacity? Who has the capacity to connect with employers, conduct information interviews, and do that assessment of the employer labor needs, and then write proposals? And you need to carve that out in your interagency team. And that might be for some For some teams, larger school districts, for example, it might be the work experience coordinator. It might be the vocational rehabilitation field counselor. It might be a vocational rehabilitation pre-ETS, pre-employment transition services counselor. You might contract some employment services with a community employment provider who would do some of this for you. None of those are wrong answers. It's just that you do have to, I know whose job it is to actually do that. And has that person been trained in any way, shape, or form in job development? What's happening now in schools in particular, given some of the new legislation, is that school staff have been asked to become job developers because of the need to secure work experiences and transition programs. And inversely, vocational rehabilitation staff have been expected to become educators when it comes to some of the pre-ETs that's expected. So we can't expect people to be good at something that they haven't been trained to do. So have they been trained in job development? Is it part of their job description? Do they know what they're getting into? Do you need to reevaluate a job classification to encompass not only job development, but I would say family engagement, as well as some of the discovery and assessment activities? And ideally, you want somebody or multiple people who have some acumen in maintaining ongoing relationships with local employers. And what that means really is building employer relationships. Dale and I did some training for employment providers in Indiana, and we met this older lady who had been with the company for a long time, but had been in the city that we were training in. And it was a smaller city. It was Boonville, Indiana. Boonville, Indiana. She had been there most of her life, and she knew everybody. She was the ideal job developer because she knew absolutely everybody in that town. She was able to integrate herself into the Chamber of Commerce. And so it takes some work and focus to be able to build employer relationships. It's not something that you can do just offhandedly. It's not something that's just going to come to you. Some of the strategies that we talk about are getting to know employers in the community, also getting to know the industries in your community. What drives your community? I would imagine in Texas, for example, would be a lot of farming communities. There would be a lot of oil driven business. There would be a lot of hospitality driven business. And so in various places, the jobs in the industry that drives that community may change. Being able to not look at employers through the lens of what can I get from them because I need to place students, but more so, as Dale just said, to be able to determine and truly understand what their labor needs are. Because if you are a person who facilitates work experiences for students and you understand the labor needs of the employers in your community, you not only will be able to place students more effectively, but you might also be able to train students more effectively and say, well, in this town, they're really looking for, fabricators. They're really looking for people that can do landscaping, those types of things. And again, building that relationship when you first talk to the employer is about emphasizing the service that you bring to the employer. What is the benefit to the employer? And that is the biggest paradigm shift as Dale and I talk about this. You may have viewed approaching employers with the end goal of, I need to place my students there. But if we can get you to say the end goal really is to emphasize your service and to understand their labor needs, the placements, if you have an effective proposal, will happen afterwards. And so developing a professional network is probably one of the best tools that a job developer can have. And again, I'm using job developer in very broad and loose terms. I'm referring to job developers as anybody whose responsibility it is to facilitate work experiences for students. You have then become a job developer. We could call it work experience facilitator, whatever you want to call it. Really, developing your professional network will be one of the greatest tools that you have at your disposal. Some of the strategies, again, researching local economic trends and becoming really active in the local business community, the Rotary, the Chamber, volunteering at community events, becoming part of local professional organizations, and just getting to know what it is that the business labor needs are. What do they think about? What are their pain points? What are the hiring trends? Where do they tend to find people? And that leads us to, again, another important point, which is 80% of job seekers only apply for posted positions, but only 20% of the jobs that are out there are actually posted. So as you can see, there's a very large gap in this pool of jobs that are available to people. But if you're only looking at the jobs that are posted, you are only getting a very small fraction of the available employment, especially in small business. I remember years ago, 10, 15 years ago, our local large paper here, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, would have 2 or 3 sections of employment want ads. And now there's hardly enough to fill 1/2 of a section of a page. They just don't do that anymore. And so how do we find the jobs that aren't posted? It's being able to build relationships with employers, but also to understanding that a lot of the students that we're talking about, we're not talking about off the rack jobs. We are talking about going to an employer based on what a student is interested in, gauging their labor needs, and proposing to them that the introduction of this new employee into their environment would have benefit for them as well as the student. And again, I go back to this role of families and caregivers, especially when we're talking about building your networks. And so you may feel like you're the job developer and you're responsible for this, and you may feel like this is your responsibility alone, but it's not. That's why we talk about interagency school teams, and that's why we talk about using the family's networks as well as your own, because the more people that you can get tapping into their own networks on behalf of the student, you have just broadened the possibilities of people that you can talk to help make a good job match. So make sure that you're utilizing the energy and the contacts that the family brings to the table when you're considering what employers to approach for an informational interview. So now that we've talked a lot about networking and talked a lot about interagency roles, let's get back into this idea of the information interview. And for that, I'll throw it back to Dale.
Thanks, Sean. So as I mentioned earlier, your goal when you're contacting an employer is to secure an informational interview. So of these 2 approaches, which do you think is going to be the most effective? Asking, do you have any jobs? Or I'd like to learn more about your company. Any thoughts about that? So the answer is, drum roll, please. Yep. And whoever wrote that, learn more about the company. Absolutely. If you say, do you have any jobs? It makes it very clear that that's what you're after. And ultimately, you might someday be recommending this person for employment at that business. But what we also need to give a strong message to the employer is, not so fast. We don't know if we have somebody that could meet the needs of some of these jobs that you have available. I'm here to learn about your business. I'm here to learn about your labor needs so I can do a better job of ascertaining whether there might be a good match to a job at that place of work. Or we might need to look at a work experience as a precursor to a paid job. So you don't want to get into all of that with the employer. So you don't want to ask, do you have any jobs? You want to make it clear that your primary intention is to learn about this company, learn about what you do. You know, you're an educator in a community, and part of your way that you help people with their vocational goals as an educator is based on what kind of jobs that are out there, what they look for in the people to fill those jobs. And it makes you more effective in your role. So that's why you want to conduct those informational interviews. And the best way to approach it is just to be really clear what you're there for. You're there to schedule a 20 to 25 minute informational interview. And to do so, you can use a script like what's up on the screen here. You don't have to, but what you should always do is before you actually start to speak to an employer, especially if it's an employer that you don't know very well, then you want to be clear in your own mind as to what it is you're going to say. You want, if you're stumbling around or if you're not sure what to say, or if you seem nervous, then that's what the employer's perception is going to be. Okay, this person's nervous. And it might just be because you're not used to approaching and working with employers, but they don't know that. And they're just going to know that you're nervous, and they're not going to know why you're nervous. So be prepared. Best way not to be nervous is be prepared in terms of what it is you're planning to say. And this is one way to say it. I work with job seekers interested in your industry. Would it be possible for me to come see what you do and talk about the skill sets needed to work in this field so I can better prepare them to be successful? Do you have 25 minutes to meet with me next week? So it's quick. You're not taking up a lot of their time. You're asking for a specific appointment in a specific period of time, and you're making it clear as to what you want to do with that time you want to learn. And so now it's just up to the employer to figure out, is that something I want to spend time on? And more likely than not, given your role, and if you explain it the way we just suggested, they're going to give you 20 to 25 minutes of their time. That's been our experience. More people are willing to say yes, especially when the ask is for that amount of their time. And it's to learn about their business, which most people want people to know about their businesses that they work in. They want the community to be aware. And when you conduct that informational interview, it gives you that access to the business. It's low pressure. You're not asking for a job. It starts that working relationship, and it allows you to kind of learn the culture and the work environments. And when you're doing your informational interview, you're not only looking for opportunities for the people that you represent, but you're also looking to be sure that that employer is a good place for the people that you represent. So you're looking at them while they're looking at you. And you need to screen that. You need to kind of screen some of these companies because the work environments in which you're going to put people have a lot to do with whether they're going to be successful on the job. And then that's where you uncover those possibilities. And it allows you to, especially if you're organized and prepared, allows you to leave a very good first impression. So that's what you want to accomplish with the informational interview. Sometimes we say a warm contact. Well, that means there's somebody who's introducing you, somebody that is providing you access to a particular kind of business. If you don't have that, then it's considered cold, which means you're just approaching them for the first time. You don't know them, they don't know you. But again, if you make it clear why you're contacting them, you can get your foot in the door, hopefully with the right person in the right department. You want to pay attention. I'd say, as far as my experience has been, it's about a 50-50, that 50% chance that you'll uncover a good opportunity for somebody that you're representing based on what they tell you. The other 50% of the time, it's you identifying an opportunity just by being there, just by looking around and observing. So it's really important to be paying attention. It's important to be able to access the businesses. Some of these informational interviews can be done via Zoom, like we're doing now. And that's a great way to start the conversation with an employer, especially if you're still in, if your community is still dealing with the pandemic. However, when given the chance to go to the place of business where the person would have the work experience or the job, and to be able to do it safely, is a better option. And so you can start maybe with a Zoom, but maybe at some point you suggest that if at all possible, you'd also like to come by for a work site tour, just to kind of see the business and make it clear to the employer. You're there to kind of identify opportunities to help the business, not necessarily just to help the students or adults that you're working with. You want to ask those open-ended questions. You want to be prepared with those questions. Again, while you're touring, you can be asking the questions as well. And you want to leave your preconceived notions at the door. The reason for that is, like, so for example, grocery stores. A lot of kids, especially with disabilities, get opportunities at grocery stores, given the turnover in those positions. Now, you might feel because you've had an experience with a grocery store that you now, when you're approaching another grocery store, know what their labor needs are. But don't do that. Don't have those preconceived notions, because each business is different. Each business has a manager or managers or supervisors who have a very clear understanding as to what it is they would like to see when they conduct these interviews and what they want to see when it comes to employees that work there. And that might not be the same just because they're both grocery stores. You can even have the same business. I've seen it where we've gone into 2 different Petcos, pet stores, and their criteria for what they're looking for and the way they use their workforce in those 2 stores was very different. So you can't even make those assumptions when you're going to a second of the same business or the same company. The informational interview is also trying to give you this type of information. What kind of productivity problems are they facing? What is their overall workforce made up of? What kind of jobs are available? Which ones are turning over the most? You want to get that big picture, because you also want to look at career opportunities for the people that you serve. You want to bring some of that information back and share it with them so they have a better understanding of that particular business that you had a chance to meet with. And you want to maybe think about possible jobs later on. Maybe they have a certain kind of job that doesn't fit the folks you're working with right now, but then who you're working with will change over time. And if you know about the business and all of their different kinds of jobs, you might have an opportunity to fill one of the other jobs later on. You want to know about those qualities that they look for in their new employees. And you want to know about the hiring process. It's a lot easier to play the game when you know the rules. So we can go through a lot of mock interviews and standard questions that might get asked during the interview, but that's not nearly as effective as just flat out asking the employer, what questions do you ask during an interview? And once you have the questions, it's important to ask also, well, what answers do you look for from the questions that you asked during the interview? Can you see how by having those questions answered by the employer, you can better match, because you know what kind of questions they're going to have in the interview? You know what kind of answers they're looking for to those questions. Now, that doesn't mean you just give the person you're working with the right answers, because they have to be answers that make sense for that person. But it allows you to play your role, which is, okay, I know the person and I know the questions that the employer is asking, and I think that this person can do a good job. That's the best way to prepare somebody for a job interview. And that's why we think you should conduct those informational interviews in advance of a student applying for a job. It allows you to make a very effective employer presentation, and they would be prepared to make a very effective employer interview. based on your knowledge that you gained during the informational interview. And lastly, you want to find out about those unmet labor needs, those challenges to their workforce that usually happen in any business. Sometimes it's time of day. Sometimes they have peaks in terms of when they need stuff done based on a day of the week. Sometimes it's which certain days of the month. Sometimes it's certain seasons of the year. But you want to find out when are the peaks, when are the valleys in the work that they do, because you can add and supplement and complement that workforce with some of the folks that you're representing in customized jobs, as well as just filling in for some key tasks that might need to be done during certain times of the day, week, or year. So this is an example of a informational interview with it's like an exploring a hands-on kind of museum for children that deals with the sciences. And so they get, like, for example, geology, they'll get rocks in. Well, shipment comes in 3 times a week. We can't get in the room for the first 2 days afterwards. Same experience that we've had when we go to the back of a dollar store. Whenever the shipments come in to those dollar stores, it just gets piled into the back. And it's really difficult for them to kind of get that material out from back to try to get it onto the shelves. So there's an example of where we can meet some of their labor needs. I have peoples with master's degrees bagging rocks, and the office is a mess. Look at all these catalogs. Website orders have just given to my department. We don't have anyone to process these orders. So what you're uncovering in different departments within this business, this museum, is different labor needs, different challenges. And those challenges in each of those departments occur at different periods of time. So by paying attention to all that, you might be able to identify an individual that could move within those departments to meet some of those labor needs. Okay, so that's just a quick example of what you might be able to uncover during an informational interview. And then now we're going to go to the case study, Dress for Less.
So while Dale's pulling that up, just want to remind people, if you have questions or comments, feel free to throw those into the chat box. We'll also take questions at the end, but we know that this session, we throw a lot of stuff at you. And so just wanted you to know to go ahead and throw them in the chat box if you want.
Okay, so we want to give you an example to kind of get a little experience with what we're talking about in terms of an informational interview. So we're just going to describe, and you can read up on the screen as well. As a matter of fact, I'll make it a little bit bigger, which will make it easier for you guys to read it. But when we went to this particular business, Ross Dress for Less, while we were waiting for the manager, we noticed some disgruntled customers were leaving without buying something because the line was so long at the cashier station. In the kids section, all the toys and the clothes were in a mess. That was something else that we learned, is sometimes retail stores have toy departments, not just to be able to sell some toys, but it occupies the kids while mom and dad are able to kind of focus on buying whatever it is they're looking for. And so what we realize is that they have a messy kids department, but some of that is by design, just so they can get some of these kids occupied while they're in the store, and maybe show some interest in some of the toys. Mom and dad will relent and then buy them for them. The racks in the girls' junior section were a mess, and yet the men's department looked great. So why in one department is everything's really organized, and in another department, why isn't? Just stuff to be paying attention to. The back stock room was a mess. Large bins with these colored nibs needed to be organized in order to put the right sizes on the hangers with the right clothes. That all happened in the back. And the area around the cash register was messy from people turning some stuff back in or deciding not to buy certain items. And the dressing rooms were disorganized, piles of clothes around in the racks. And so we're trying to get you to see that it's not only some of the labor needs, but the timing on when some of that happens. You know, when things are slow, then they can clear out some of that stuff around the cash register or go back into the dressing rooms and take care of that. But it's what do you do during those peak times? And can you, as a source of some labor, really bring some folks in that can help? The manager made these comments. Thanks for waiting. We get slammed over the lunch hour. Usually that's unfortunately when they also get their, is when they get their shipments. Trying to reorganize things. This person happened to mention that there was a secret shopper and she did get some low marks because some of the clothes were missized and the place wasn't as organized as it should be. You found out that Joe was the person that did a really good job at keeping the men's area organized. And there was an interest in having the kids department look more like the men's department. And the two areas that they were losing money and they're losing customers. So they ended up paying more overtime to bring stock back in to get it ready and get on the floor in time. And then mentioned the shoe department and the back stock room. And then the sizing nibs. That was really something that was really kind of driving the manager crazy. So you can see that there's a number of things that you can get from doing an informational interview just based on observation. And then there's another set of information that you can get from the questions that you ask the manager. All very important information. And then, so what we want you to do now is just tell us what would be a good work experience for a student that would help the student, but it would also help the business. And not only think about what tasks you would have the students do during a work experience, but when would you have them do it? And what departments would you have the person do those tasks in? So what tasks, what department, and when would you have them do it?
Dale, you scroll
While
back
you
up.
guys are starting to answer that, I'll keep this up here in case you want to kind of observe some of the stuff that was stated. So we're hoping you're going to play along and help us identify labor needs of Dress for Less. Cleaning up the shoe department, excellent. Students could work during the lunch hours, yes. Help to load and unload the shipments that came in so that the rest of the folks could stay at the cash register and generate more sales, absolutely. Sorting and sizing the hangers, yep. Yep. Good. And there's a couple sub-steps in there, isn't there? Maybe we could get hangers prepared with the sizes already on them. And then that way, when the stuff comes out of the boxes, it can go right on the hanger with the right sizes on them already. Those nibs have that on there already. Need for organizations for different areas, the morning help crew to get new merchandising out, pulling misplaced items and returning into that area. Yes. Okay. Guys, you're doing a great job on this. Excellent. Okay. So a lot of you had some good ideas, sorting and sizing hangers, rehanging clothes, cleaning up the shoe racks, loading, unloading shipments. Okay. So now what I want you to do is if you already put something up here that you had specific tasks that you would think that they might be good at, What I want you to do now is tell me, based on what you recommended, how would that help Dress for Less? What would, how would this affect Dress for Less's bottom line? How would this allow them to meet their mission, which is to make a profit? Return customers, yep, that means profit. Increase sales, thank you. That means profit. A better appearance, which ultimately could generate more sales. Absolutely. And you know what else is also part of this, which is indirect but very important, is if you bring in the people at the right period of time to keep things organized, they don't have to keep people on for as long towards the end of their shift, or they don't have to pay overtime. So by bringing the people in at the right time, you don't create a backlog where people have to put in extra time at a different point in time. So you're also saving them some labor costs as well. So very good. You guys did a nice job streamlining the processes, more structured processes and routines for all, making them all much more efficient. So excellent job on uncovering the tasks. Excellent job in terms of understanding and appreciating that when you come up with these opportunities, there is a benefit to that business and their bottom line. And that's the sort of information that we should think should be in a proposal when you go back after you do your informational interview. With that, I will turn it back. I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Sean.
There we go. All right, let me pull the slides back up here. Nice job on the case study, guys. It really is, you know, the more that you do it, the more that you get an eye for it. And probably, you know, we would encourage you just every day, not even in your work with students, but, you know, if you go into a Home Depot or if you go into a place to shop, just look with a different eye and see if you can see where things are messy or disorganized, or maybe the outside of the building needs some care, or if there were any customer service slippages. You know, once you start looking for it, is it Denise Bissonette, who's a job developer guru, says, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you start seeing things in businesses that you walk into, you'll think that way the whole time. Oh, we could do this. Oh, we could do that. That's kind of what we're getting at. We're also wanting to continue to reinforce the idea that this is something that you should do in partnership with the various entities in your area. And maybe one of the steps to build your capacity to facilitate work experiences would be to make sure that you've got the right partnerships in place to be able to do it. You know, there have been in times, for example, where Dale and I have gone in and done work on site with schools, and there's been one part of the puzzle that's just completely missing. And we have to talk about, you know, boy, it would sure be great if these people were at the table. In the chat box, why don't you do me a favor and just tell me, how do you feel your current partnerships are in terms of facilitating work experiences for students? Do you feel like you have good working partnerships, or do you struggle to work side by side with some of the other entities that should be responsible or helping you? Like, where do you sit? Do you feel like you've got good partnerships or not? You know, involving those people, while you guys are throwing that in the chat box, involving the other partners really, you know, can achieve a lot of things. Making sure, for example, that there is alignment between, say, the IEP or the IPE and the work experience. Making sure that the funding is available to be able to do these things. That's why getting the team together after, say, a family interview is so important. When you start brainstorming work possibilities, you can also start brainstorming different funding and support possibilities. And we find that those change no matter where you go. Sometimes there are programs in place that aren't in place in other places. And so, letting people chime in on that is really important. Some of the responses we've got, let's see, we have good partnerships, but as our program expands, we are in need of additional partnerships. And that is from Megan. Megan, could you expand on that a little bit for me and just tell me what are some of the additional partners that you'd like to bring to the table in this process? And then Melissa says, my current issue is one terrific site and the liability concerns with the legal team. So working with what I'm assuming is the employers to be able to continue to facilitate work experiences if they have worries about liability. And so another huge thing in terms of stakeholder involvement in this process is transportation needs. And we know, you know, our communities are often very spread out, and getting a student either from home to a work experience or from the school to a work experience requires some creativity. It's another place where you can bring in the family too, especially if some of the work experience might be taking place during non-traditional work hours. There's no transportation magic bullet, unfortunately, but that's where the kind of a cross-agency stakeholder effort really comes in. So Veronica says, we like to make it a big deal on Facebook, district website, news clips, etc. when one of our job training sites hires one of our students. This in turn encourages other businesses to open their doors. Oh, that is a wonderful, wonderful idea, because businesses love to be promoted, don't they? Dale said, businesses want you to know what they're up to, but they also would love the press of saying, hey, you know, this business, and again, not just a work experience, but hired this student and really tout that. I think that is a great idea from Veronica.
And the other thing I really like about it, Veronica, is the fact that they hired that person, which means you probably took some care in matching that person to that work experience. And a lot of times we don't see that. We see that the work experiences are set up in advance and they just kind of run these kids through it. Whereas if you take some thought and if it's developed on behalf of specific students based on their interests and abilities, then it's much more likely to get to a paid job. And so you really are able to demonstrate that. And so that's a sign of a good work experience.
Mm-hmm. That's how we select them, based on what we teach in the classroom. So if we do floral design, cake decorating, landscape design, photography, we kind of connect the businesses to what they're learning in the class, and the students take over. You know, they decide what is their preference, what is their strengths or their interests, and that's how we make contact with the business partners. So they're getting trained in the classroom, they have hands-on through on-job training on that business, and so the employer will say, okay, you know, because our whole goal is when we graduate our students from the 18 plus is that they have to be employed. And, you know, this helps us when we make a big deal, when one business partner is ready to say, you know, he's good to go, I'm going to hire him, then that kind of opens up the door for other of our local businesses. They see that. And of course, they want the recognition and they, you know, they want that acknowledgement. So that encourages them to have us as a job partner. You know, they're connected to us.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Veronica. And I want everybody else to hear that. It's based on their interests and it's based on the skills, the things that they have to offer. And that's not lost on the employers. If the employers hear that you're bringing those kids based on their interests and based on their ability, then they're going to have some confidence that you, in fact, are providing an employment service to them.
Right.
And so that's one of the hardest things to get across, is that as an educator, you really can still be involved in providing employment services. And Veronica and her team are really showing that those businesses are getting some value there. It's a great job.
One of the obstacles, and I was going to write it in there, that, you know, we started our 18 plus program about 6 years ago. But one obstacle that we see is, you know, and it's kind of, it's somewhat discouraging, but, you know, the moment we have an employability vocational training agreement that we present to the businesses. You know, they worry about liability. But when the teacher cannot build that connection, or the business says, well, call me back next week, I need to clear it with main office or whatever. And then I reach out, and then, you know, I send them everything that they need. And then when they don't call me back, I always wonder, what does that business, what are they worried about? And you know, we don't have too many that don't call back, but I wonder, what is their biggest fear and what is their worry?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's good that you worry about what they worry about.
Right, right.
That's important. And I'll tell you what, we really think that this notion of an employer proposal is an important one. So Veronica, what I'd like to do is postpone answering that further until we get to that information, and then I want to come back to your question.
Okay.
Well, that's excellent interaction too. Thank you for that. And that's a huge, it's a huge question. You know, you're not going to have 100% success rate with all of the employers that you approach. But I like what Dale said. It's good that you're worrying about what they worry about, because that really might really boil down to what it is that we're encouraging you to do, is to think about them and not really think about as much about your program and as your students initially, until you can bring everything back. Also the families too. We love to loop back into the families again, and making sure that throughout this process, you're communicating with the families and kind of checking in and saying, have we set the expectation with the families in our transition program that employment in the community is exactly what it is we're working towards? Because a lot of times I see that it seems to be kind of vague. And I believe that with families, you got to come right out and say it. The end result of this program is we're preparing your son or daughter for employment. That's what we're here for. That's our purpose. Do the families have the information they need to be able to navigate service systems? Have we done what we need to do, to address apprehension? If they're expressing that they're not interested or they're worried, what have we done? And we talked about some of those strategies in the last webinar. But again, we're kind of always looping back so we don't get too far ahead of people in this entire process. So I would say, for example, that once you've gone through this, and if you've done an employer interview and you want to create a proposal for a work experience, before you do that, you're going to want to talk to the family and say, hey, listen, this is all the things that we've done on behalf of your student. I just want you to know that this is what we're proposing. Okay. You don't want to go, hey, guess what? We found him a job. You want to make sure that the family is in on that decision and that they're approving of the decision, and that if they've got some worries, you're addressing the worries before things get too far. Because the last thing you would want then is to go to all that trouble to write a proposal, to get a work experience, and then the families go, no, hold on. I'm not ready for that yet. No, we're not doing that. Or I don't want him working there, or whatever it is that they may come up with. So I'm just kind of encouraging you always to keep the family in the loop so we avoid some of those misunderstandings. And speaking of the employer proposal, I'm just checking the chat box here. I want to make sure I saw something else pop in. Speaking of the proposal, let's have Dale jump back in and walk us through the steps now. We've done the information interview and we've communicated with the family. It's time for us to say, hey, listen, I think that we got a match here and we're going to put it together a proposal. Dale's going to walk us through exactly how we do that.
So you want to facilitate the hiring decision. And I think part of facilitating a hiring decision is uncovering their issues or concerns, the things that Veronica was bringing up earlier. And we think the best time to do that is through a structured type of presentation and proposal. And so what we suggest is that you do have a written proposal. It can be a one-page letter, and we provided you with a sample proposal letter that you could use, and that was amongst the materials that we've provided you. We also sent you a list of potential informational interview questions. Now, there's a lot of them on there. You can't ask all of those questions, but that's kind of a master list of questions that you could ask. And then we give you an informational interview site visit form. And that's the place that you can take notes and kind of go through the process of conducting that informational interview. And what you could do is use that set of questions to select the ones in each of the sections of the informational interview that you would like to ask. So we give you the questions, we give you a place to take notes as you get that information from conducting the interview. And then you use all of that information on your employer proposal. Information about the job seekers or the work experience participants, information about their labor needs, why you think it's a good match, and what are the services that you have to offer. And what's up on the screen here is just those sections. It's kind of the sections of an employer proposal, but it's also the steps that you would go through if you were to make an employer presentation. So the first step is identify those employer labor needs, and you get that off of your notes from the informational interview. And it would be real similar to that list of different needs that you heard about from the planetarium. And then the next step, after you identify their labor needs, which is kind of a summary of that informational interview.
And just so you guys know, the planetarium is right next to the exploratorium.
Oh,
They're two different, they're
Yeah.
sister businesses.
Yeah, I got the name wrong, yes. And you want to use refined task lists. That's really your common denominator. Those are the things that are going to match what's needed by the company in relation to what the person is able to do. Can they organize the shoes? Can they take a bunch of clothes that are in the back of a dressing room, put them on the right size hangers and put those back where they came from? Can they put the nibs onto the sizer, little plastic sizers onto each of the hangers? Can they distinguish between the different kinds of clothes and different sizes? So all those things that you put down in there for the employer, you want that to ultimately end up to be a task list. And that task list is using their language, whatever terms they use for those things. As a matter of fact, different retailers, some call them nibs, some have different other funny names for those little pieces of plastic that give the sizes. But you want to use whatever terminology they use. And you want to have that list, and you want to be sure that either the person can do those tasks that are on the list because you've already assessed that, or you're building in some of those tasks into the work experience. So then the second step, after you go through the labor needs, and this is just an example of a potential task list from the exploratorium. So you got to see the list of the things that were wrong in the different departments. And then you can see how that list of things that were issues turns into a task list that we can use to address those labor needs of that particular business. And then you move on to the second step, which is you identify the candidate and how and why that candidate is qualified and interested in doing those types of that type of task, that kind of work. And then this shows, okay, here's your labor needs, here's the person, here's what makes them qualified to do that. Third step is you want to then talk about the benefits. And that was the question that I was asking you about Dress for Less. Okay, so they're going to help out in these different departments. It's so what? What is it going to make in terms of a difference in the bottom line? And you guys did a nice job of talking about that. That's the sort of thing you would also put on the proposal here. They want to know, bottom line, why should I engage in this work experience? Well, it's going to help your operations in the following ways. Which leads us to if it's not a good job match? What if you have a lot of labor needs by the business, but they don't tend to be the sort of thing that any of the folks that you work with would be able to do or be able to do well? Well, you could still make a proposal to that business, but instead of proposing a specific person, you would propose that you would like to continue to work with this business because they do have some labor needs, and you might be able to continue to look for some candidates that could do that work. And you could bring them by for work site tours or job shadows, or you could do some assessments on site that might help you and the employer know whether some of the folks you work with might make a good job match. Or you could use them for things like a mock interview. So no, there's still benefit to making a presentation to an employer, even when you don't have a job match right away for that particular person. And then the question is, would the proposal mention paid or unpaid? If you would like it to be paid, mention that it should be paid. And in your informational interview, you want to kind of feel them out on the prospect of them paying for a work experience. So if that's your ideal, is that it would be a paid work experience paid by the employer, you want to assess the likelihood of that happening during your informational interview. And then if you think there's a possibility of that, you want to put that in your proposal. Absolutely. Then you want to discuss your role. What is it that you will do to support this individual on the job? Help with the training if you're able to do that. Or if you do provide job coaching, what would that look like? Maybe you check in on the employer and the person just to be sure things are going well. Those are all services that you have to offer. And then there's benefits to those services. So this is what employers tell us. When we do a good job with work experiences and working with employers using this process, they see it as a recruitment strategy for their business. They see that you're generating interest in their business, that kind of work, and you're helping to identify potential employees for that company in the future. And that's the sort of thing that you should put on your proposal, is that you help with recruitment by generating this interest in their place of business. Step 5 really gets at what I would consider to be what Veronica was asking me about. It's the ask. So Veronica, what I want you to think about is if you have the proposal and you come back after you've done that informational interview and you go through those steps of 1 through 4, where you're talking about their labor needs and you have those task lists, and then you talk about the qualifications of the individual, and then you talk about how that qualification is going to benefit their business, and then here are the services that you get from us, and here are the benefits of that. Now, we would like to propose a paid work experience for this student on this, starting at this time, doing these tasks, and you're basically walk them along a path of, is the answer yes, or is the answer no? And if the answer is kind of a hemming and hawing, or I got to check with the front office, or I got to check with another manager, I got to check with the supervisor, if you're getting something besides a yes or no, 2 things you should do. One is make it clear before you start the presentation that you're simply asking for a yes or no. And no is okay, but then that doesn't have me bothering you if in fact you don't want to proceed with our proposal. And what you want to do is make them comfortable before they have to say no. Make them comfortable to be able to say no. And then when you make the ask, they're more likely to say yes or no versus maybe, or give you some, why don't you check back with me in the fall, something like that. And you can just be really clear. I put they'll see it in the proposal. I put a lot of work into this. I think this is a good match. What might be your issues or concerns? and you want to acknowledge and validate that their issues, their concerns are valid. And it could be, in fact, that they know that the person has a disability. And they're not going to necessarily say that. This is a protected class of people. They might be liability. They're assuming the person's going to get hurt, when we in fact know that the liability for the folks that we support are no better, no worse than any other employee that they may hire. But you want to create an environment in which them telling you yes or no is a possibility. And if you do it that way, then we hope that they will in fact take you up on that. And they will say, this is my issue, this is my concern, which can bring you to step 6. And that is that you can reiterate, you get a chance to kind of reiterate, well, this is what I thought they would be doing. This is how it'd help your business. This is where I think the person fits in. What part of this are you having a problem with? Is it the person? Is it the fact they might get hurt? And anticipating some of their concerns is a good strategy. And what it also gets at is it might just not be one thing. It might be a couple things. And so by letting them kind of get that out and letting them know that it's okay that they're talking about their issues or concerns, what you can say is, well, it helps me because I have more information to better match this person at the next business that I might go to. So you tell me what your concerns are really going to be helpful. And what if I can address that concern? Is this something that you would still consider? So it allows you to say if. And then once you say if, you might be able to provide them with some insurance rider or something that addresses their issue around liability. You might be able to structure the job in such a way that they feel more comfortable that they're going to be able to do it safely. You might be able to negotiate getting a coach or some person that would kind of support them, an aide that would kind of support them in a way that might address some of their concerns. Or maybe you say, maybe it's that they don't think they're going to be able to work fast enough for the money that they're paying. Well, you could say, what if we do a 1-week assessment? What if we do a trial experience? And if the trial experience goes well, then and only then would we ask you to put them on your payroll or provide a paid work experience. So by doing it that way, using a proposal, making them comfortable saying yes or no, and then having that chance to negotiate gives you, I think, the best opportunities to address that. And ultimately, you are able to find out what they're worrying about. And that really, if you can just do that, even if they don't say yes or to what it is you're proposing, if you just get them to be open about what their concerns are, you are doing your job. That is part of what it is we do, is help understand what some of these folks' issues and concerns are. Okay, so I think we're starting to run low on time here. Let me see where we are. So after step 6, that allows you to kind of come back when you don't get an answer, either yes or no, and it allows you to reinforce some of the benefits of your proposal.
Hey,
Now, we
Dale,
really-
while I go through the
that is-
webinar coaching calls, could you pull up the sample proposal letter? And just so people can see it, I think it might be good for people just to see a copy of the sample proposal letter. But what I'll do is just, we'll go through here. We've got a couple questions too, but I want to go through and just say again that the coaching call, the final coaching call is May 18. And again, if you have the ability to try to do an employer information interview, that would be great to be able to tell us how it is that went. But also too, if you just want to go somewhere, like go to a place that you do business and just walk around and try to look at things with a different eye. See if you can just spot some areas within the store or the business that you say, hey, that could be done better. Hey, somebody could help out with that. just to practice that, and then bring that back to us on the 18th and say, yeah, I went to Lowe's and I was going to get myself some paint, but I noticed that, the paint cans were all mismatched, and, the carpet samples were everywhere, and, that kind of stuff, just so we can begin that habit. Dale, do you have that pulled up?
Yeah, another suggestion that I have is, why don't you contact an employer that you know well, or a family member, and conduct an informational interview with them, just to kind of practice identifying labor needs. So, do it with a friendly person rather than somebody that you don't know. So this is an example of our employer proposal letter. And it starts out, and we can see it has these different sections. What you observed during the informational interview. What kinds of jobs and job tasks, and what the benefit of having somebody do those tasks are. I'll make it a little bigger too, to help you to read.
And this has been provided to you as part of the material, so you have access to this. I just thought, given all the great steps that Dale walked through, it'd be nice for you to see what a finished product would look like. The proposal is really just a letter.
Yeah. And we think all of your work in discovery and assessment, and then networking and reaching out to employers and doing an informational interview, it all culminates on a good quality proposal. And once you write one of these proposal letters, then you've got a template for yourself that you could always use in the future. And remember what I said about the good job candidate. This is optional. You can come back to an employer and say, you've got some labor needs here that I think over time we can help you with. I don't have a match right now. By just saying that, you're really showing the employer that you're just not going to stick them with anybody. That you know what they're looking for, and you haven't identified that person that would be a good match yet. But I'd like to continue to work with you. And so what you could do is then create that employer site as a place to do exploration, to do discovery and assessment. You can use it for a tour, a job shadow. You can do situational assessments at the employer sites. So there's different ways to offer your services to the employer in a way that continues to allow you to work with that employer until you have a match. And then even after you have a match, you could have another employment opportunity later on as well.
I think I could convert this proposal to not identifying like a specific student for a job site, but a job training site for the whole program. That would be possible with this proposal.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially if you had some language in here, like probably right up around here where you talk about the candidates,
Right.
Where you would say, we're not sending you anybody. We're going to send you people that have an interest in your type of work
with job
and have
coaches.
demonstrated some abilities to do some of the work that you might be able to have. And we'd like you to sign up for this program. But make sure it's about them and how you can help them. Because a lot of times we don't do that, and then they think they're helping us. They think they're helping this kid with a disability, and in a lot of cases, then they don't even think about hiring.
Yeah, I want to jump in and maybe, because there was a great question in the chat box here. Oh, I lost it. No, there it is. It's from Elke. Somebody please correct me if I'm wrong. Unpaid work-based learning is not allowed to replace a worker at a business site based on my understanding. So going back to the Dress for Less scenario, we really cannot put a student there to benefit the employer. How should we sell the idea that our student is not replacing a worker and no benefit is going to be given to the business? Do you have just any thoughts on that idea of making sure that you're not going too far and violating the unpaid labor laws?
Yeah, well, the key is unpaid. And the way when you use the word replace, what's key there is that you're not permanently replacing an employee. That doesn't mean on a Tuesday afternoon, when an employee is doing one thing, we can't have another employee there doing that for for the person who works there. We just can't, what we can't be is seen as displacing their workforce with people who aren't getting paid, because that's taking advantage of our folks' labor. If it's time limited, if it's tied to education, and if no other employees are being displaced, then you can use this as an unpaid work experience. But you don't want somebody to sit in an unpaid work experience for a month, because they don't need that long to figure out whether this is going to be good for them or not. So you want them there not to replace anybody or displace anybody. You want them there to do some of the work, but it can be the same work that other employees do. That's not the problem. You don't have to make up work. You can have them do what other employees do. You just can't displace them. It needs to be time limited. And when it's time limited, it needs to be tied to education. So just
Excellent.
don't take advantage of it. And if the employer likes what they're doing, make it a paid work experience, because if the employer likes it, they should be paying for the labor that they get. Sometimes you can even negotiate that so that it's unpaid when the person's learning it and they're not very productive, and you would call it an assessment or a unpaid work experience, with the idea that as soon as they're able to do it at a productive level, you make it clear to the employer that then they have to start paying for that labor. And they should pay for that labor. You know, if they don't pay the person that you put there, they got to pay somebody else to do it. But great question.
Yeah, great question and great interaction today, everybody, in the chat box. And this, this is an important topic, and as Dale always says, this is probably the one thing that school and employment staff dislike the most, is the prospect of going and interacting with employers, and that's probably because it brings with it the strongest prospect of getting told no, and that's not comfortable for a lot of people. So if you attack it the way that we're talking about it, in terms of learning first and then matching second, we certainly hope that makes you feel a lot more comfortable with it, and hopefully you have some fun with it. Doing as many of these information interviews as possible will give you a very broad employer network, and it'll continue to let you practice that that point of view, that ability to walk into a business, asking the right questions, finding the pain points, and gathering the information so you can really get a leg up. I like what somebody else said in the chat box too, about having a lot more success with local or small business than large corporate business. And Dale would probably support that notion too, wouldn't you, Dale? That it's probably easier to get in with smaller business than have to navigate the HR structure of big business.
Yeah, generally, I don't think it's worth ruling anything out that might have an opportunity, but it's ultimately related to the access to the decision makers. And when the company's smaller, you have better access to the people that ultimately make the decisions. There aren't as many layers and people to screen you out. And they have a more diverse set of labor needs in some cases, because they might have they're a smaller company. So small companies in some cases have more kind of tasks that become secondary, and that we might be able to help them with.
So we're at 2:30. I want to say thanks. You guys have great as always. It's fun. So I'm going to just throw it back to Eric and Vanessa just to see if they've got any final words before we let you go.
No final words. I mean, I posted the satisfaction survey up there. Please fill that out. That helps us continue to provide training to you and make sure that we're gearing it to your needs and make any changes that we need to and keep things going that are working well for you. Please join us on the 18th. Again, like, just show up even if you don't have a question, because we found that it really turns into a really great conversation. Just, hey, I have this, and then you might have some input or might bring up questions for you too. And it turns into a really, really fun kind of session of everyone learning and sharing. And so I think you'll benefit by coming. Please plan to come there. I posted the link, but Vanessa will also send that out as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else, Vanessa? Anything I forgot?
I don't think so. I think you did a great job.
All right. Well, we'll have the recording of this session and then all the materials posted on our website and probably by the end of the week. So look forward there too. All right. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.